Welcome everybody, and welcome Scratch Genius here. Today I am back with part 3 on how to make Geometry Dash in Scratch. Today I am going to be showing you how to make this really cool sliding effect for when a player is sliding across the floor, making some nice particles for when a player dies as well as camera shake, a way so that a player can actually finish the level, however we will make this better in part 4, and make a vignette effect around the screen as well as fixing a few more bugs. I hope you guys will enjoy this video, and let's begin. So I think the first thing we should do is make the player sliding effect. So I'm going to paint a new sprite and call it something like player particles. Then I'm going to paint a small white cube, or it can be anything you want, however I think this looks nice. I like making it pretty small. Now let's start coding the particles. First of all, we're going to drag in a when green flag clicked block, and then it's going to hide itself. This is because we're going to be creating multiple clones, so the original sprite is going to hide. Then we're going to repeat about 20 times. You can change this for how many particles you want. And we're just going to create a clone of itself. This is all the code that we're going to have for the main sprite. However, for the clones, we're going to drag in a when I start as a clone block. Then it's going to drag in a forever loop. So instead of constantly creating new clones and deleting them, we're simply going to be using the same clones, and they're simply going to move out of the player, then they're going to disappear, and then they're going to move back to the player and repeat. Since computers don't really like creating new things over and over again, this will make our game run much faster. Now let's create a new block and call it something like setup. This is going to set up all of the variables for the new particle, and make sure to check run without screen refresh. That way, it runs all of the code within one frame. Then we can drag this new block into the forever loop. Now for programming the block, first of all it's going to go to the player. Then it is going to change its X and Y, so that way, instead of spawning in the center of the player, it spawns slightly at the corner. So to do that, we're simply going to change X by and change Y by. I'm going to set the X value to -10 and the Y value to -15. I found these values to be perfect. Then we're going to set the size to a random size. So I'm going to drag in the set size block, drag in a random block, and it's going to pick a random from 75 to 125%. We are going to do the same thing with the ghost effect. So again, go to looks. Then it is going to set the ghost effect. We can duplicate the random block, and then we're going to put in something like 10 and 50. It is also going to point in a random direction. So we can point in direction, pick random from something like -90 to -60. Now for the last thing, we're going to create a new variable and call it speed. This is going to be for the sprite only. That way each clone has its own copy of this variable. So now it is going to set speed to something from 10 to 14. We can also hide the speed variable. Now remember that these two values depend on the shape and size of your player, and these values are up to you to fine-tune to what you like. Now back to the forever loop, we're going to drag in a repeat block, and it is going to move speed steps, and it is going to change the ghost effect by something like 5. Also make sure to drag in a show block at the beginning of when I start as a clone. Now if we test this, you just see that we have particles. I can see that they go constantly even if we're jumping, which we might want to fix later. One thing that I want to change, but you might not want to change, is make it so that the particles are not looking in the direction that they're traveling in. To fix this is very simple. All we have to do is go to direction, click on it, and switch it to don't rotate. This will make it so that the sprite doesn't look in the direction that it's pointing in. So now if we restart the level, you should see now it looks more like the real one. However, of course, it's up to you whether you want to change this or not. One thing I definitely want to do is make it so they don't go back as far. So all I have to do is change the ghost effect by 10 instead of 5. And now you can see that the distance of the particles is much shorter. I am also going to make the particles slightly larger. So I can select it and then hold down Alt, and it will change size in all directions. Let's see how that looks. I think that looks better in my opinion. Of course, play around with all of the values, that way you can get what you like. Now a pretty big problem is that even when the player is jumping, the particles are still there. And most of all, the particles are still going even after the player died. To fix the first problem, we're going to go to variables, make a new variable, and call it something like in air. This is going to be set to 0 if the player is not in the air, and it is going to be set to 1 if the player is in the air. So now, if in air equals 1, then it is going to hide itself. Else it is going to show. And of course we can go back and hide the variable. Now we need a way to check if the player is actually in the air or not. So we're going to go to player. Now, if it is touching the floor, then we're going to replace this if statement with an if else. So now, if the player is touching the floor, it is going to do all of this, and it is going to set in air to 0, and else it is going to set in air to 1. So now if we test it, you should see that when we jump, the particles stop appearing. Awesome! Now to make it so that the particles stop appearing when the player died, all we have to do is go back to the particles, and instead of doing if in air equals 1, we have to do if in air equals 1, or we can just duplicate this and switch this to stop. So if in air equals 1 or stop equals 1, it will hide. So now as you see, when we die, the particles stop appearing. Now I think we are done with the sliding particles, since I think they look pretty good. Anyway, now let's move on to the death particles. To do this, I'm going to right click on player particles and click duplicate. Then I'm going to name this something like death particles. Then we are going to get rid of this if else block because we don't really need it anymore. We are going to drag all of this code and put it under the when I start as a clone block. I'm also going to get rid of the setup block. Now we are going to create a new block and call it create clones. Make sure to make this run without screen refresh. Now we are going to drag this repeat block into the define block. Now the reason that we are doing this is because if this was over here, this is going to create the 20 clones over the course of 20 frames, which would look like they are each coming out of the player one at a time, and it would take 2/3 of a second to create all of the clones. Now that's quite a lot of time, and we want a big explosion, not each particle coming out one at a time. So all we have to do is drag this under here, and since it is run without screen refresh, it is going to create all of the clones within one frame. Now we're going to go to events, drag it and when I receive block, and so when it receives lose, it is going to create clones. Now as for the clones themselves, I'm going to remove this forever block. However, we're going to keep this part, and then I'm going to go back to a control, and then I'm going to drag and delete this clone block. We can also remove these change x by and change y by blocks, and change the point and direction block from -90 to -60 to -180 to 180. That way it picks the random direction of all directions. I am also going to change the speed down a bit. Again, all of these numbers are up to your personal preference, and it's up to you to choose which ones you think look best. And last but not least, I'm going to go to costumes and change the color to a light green. Now if we test this, you should see that when we die, the particles appear. Awesome! One very quick thing I want to do though, is make it so they go farther away. So to do this, I'm simply going to increase the times that it repeats this loop to 20, and I'm going to change the ghost effect by 5 instead. I should see that the particles go much more far. Now for the circle kind of particle that also appears when you die, we're going to create a new sprite, paint it, and I'm going to draw a green square. I mean circle. I recommend making this the same color as your other particles. Now for the code, it's actually pretty simple. We're going to go to code, and when the green flag is clicked, it is going to hide itself. Then when it receives lose, it is going to go to the player. It is going to set the ghost effect to 50. Then it is going to show. It's going to set size to 100%. And then we're going to drag in a repeat block. And I'm going to make it repeat about 20 times. And inside of the repeat block, it is going to change its size by 40. And it's going to change the ghost effect by something like 5. Now as you can see here, it looks pretty good. Nice. Now you can see the death animation looks a little bit empty. I think what it needs is some camera shake. So to do this, we're going to go to stage, and we're going to create 3 variables. One is going to be called shake. One is going to be called eye. And one is going to be called range. Then we can of course hide all of these variables. Then, when it receives start, it is going to set shake to 0. Then, when it receives lose, it is going to set range to 10. And it's going to set eye to 1. Now for this camera shake, we're going to be using a sine wave. I'm going to give more information on these and how to use them in a future video, however for now just follow along. We are going to drag in a repeat block, then we're going to drag in another set block, and we're going to set the shake variable. Now we're going to drag in a multiplication, then in the second slot we're going to drag in a sine, and then inside of the sine value, we're going to drag in another multiplication. In this first slot, we are going to drag in the range. In the second slot, we're going to drag in I. And in the third slot, we can just put in a big number, something like 100. Then, we're going to decrease the range by -1. And we're going to change I by 1. So the range value is the range of the camera shake, or how strong it is, and is going to decrease over time, and I is just a way of keeping track of time. Now to make it so that this actually affects anything, we have to go to floor, then we're going to drag in a set Y to, and we're going to set it Y to shake. Now you should see that we have camera shake. Nice! Now if you want to, you can also go to background and set the Y to shake divided by the number you're dividing player X by. So in this case, it's 4. So now you can see that the background also shakes a little bit. Now, the same as the particles, you can play around with these values and find what you think looks best. Now to make it so that the player can actually win the level, we're going to create a new sprite and paint it. I'm going to use a text tool, make an orange color. I'm going to write level complete. I'm going to make it pretty big. Then I'm going to put it at the center of the screen. And then I'm going to use Shift and the up arrow to move it up a few times. And now for the code. I'm going to first of all drag in a when green flag clicked block. And then it is going to go to the center. It is also going to go to the front layer. Then, forever, if the player X is less than something like -48,000, well, then it is going to broadcast a new message called win. Now, I actually kind of took that number out of nowhere. What you're going to have to do is go to variables and enable the player X variable. That way you can see it up here. Then you're going to have to finish your level. And then you can see what player X it is. So mine is going to be about -2,500. So I'm going to put that in here. And then to stop it from infinitely broadcasting win, I'm going to drag in a wait until block. And it's going to wait until player X is more than -2,500. Then, when it receives win, it is going to set stop to 1. And then it's going to show. And also when it receives start, it is going to hide. Now, if you click play and you complete your level, you should see that a level complete pops up. Awesome! Now, let's quickly make a restart button. To do this, I'm going to paint a new sprite, and I'm going to simply draw a restart button. Or you can use my really bad replay button art. You can find this in the art project, which I'll link in the description, which has all of the artwork you'll need to make this game. I decided to go with my really bad art. Now I'm going to go over to code, and I'm going to drag in a when I receive win. It is going to show. It's going to go to a position, so I'm going to do x0 and y -50, and then forever, if, we're going to drag in an AND operator. So if it is touching the mouse pointer and the mouse is down, then it is going to broadcast start. And we're also going to drag in another when I receive block. We're going to set this to start. So when it receives start, it is going to hide. So now if we test it, and we beat our level, you should see that a replay button comes up, and if you click it, it restarts the level. Something I think looks pretty good is a vignette effect. A vignette effect is like a black border that goes around your screen, and usually it adds a bunch of atmosphere to your game. This is up to you whether you want to add it or not. However, I think it definitely looks really good. So to add this, we can paint a new sprite. And I really recommend importing the one I created for you, again in the arts project. However, you can make one for yourself if you want to. After importing it or making it yourself, make sure you set the X and Y values to 0. Now you can see the game looks a lot better. Now, finally, one of the last things we're going to do in this episode is finally add music and sounds. So I'm going to go to stage, and I'm going to go to sounds. Now, once again, I have provided you with a death sound, and you can find that in the art project. However, I think it is up to you to find your own music that you like for your level. After importing the death sound and the music, we're going to go over to code, and we're going to start coding it. So to do this, we're going to go to events, drag in it when I receive start block, and it's going to set the volume to 100%, and it's going to start sound music. Then, when it receives lose, it is going to stop all sounds, and it's going to play sound death sound. And then, when it receives win, I'm going to drag in a repeat block, and I'm going to decrease the volume by -10. Now if we try it out, you should see that we have music, and when we die, a death sound plays. Nice! So before we end this video, I want to fix one tiny bug. If you click play, you can see that part of the level is sticking out of the right side of the screen. So to fix this, we have to go to floor or environment, then we're going to go to control and drag in an if else block. Then we're going to drag in an equals block and a plus block. So if x position is equal to x plus player x, then it is going to show, else it is going to hide. So pretty much, if its virtual position, which is the x and player x, is equal to this actual x position on the screen, it is going to show itself. Else, it means that it's on one of the edges of the screen, so it is going to hide. Now you can see that the levels is no longer sticking off the edge of the screen. And that is the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget this is only part 3. We are probably going to have a part 4, and maybe even a part 5. So make sure to subscribe, that way you don't miss future episodes and tutorials. If you didn't know already, I have a Discord server which you can join to ask questions and simply hang out with other Scratchers. I hope you guys have a good day, and thanks for watching!